Wood at Seth Weiner, Loyola Law School Center for Restorative Justice.
Talk about restorative justice a lot. I'm always talking about restorative justice. And I really get used to hearing, well, that sounds great. What is that again?
I struggled with this a lot at the beginning of our work because it's so amorphous in a way. What is restorative justice and what isn't restorative justice?
So I have my elevator speech. I say restorative justice is a philosophy that is an alternative to a punitive or retributive response to crime. And the practice that's come out of this is to facilitate a dialogue between the offender and the person who's been harmed, and have the offender take responsibility and be accountable to that person. The relationship has been damaged. So what are we going to do to make this right?
What I tell people in an elevator is justice used to mean balance in most places in the world. And somehow today, here, it has been distorted to mean punishment. So, restorative justice to me is restoring the definition of the word justice.
My add-on to that is that in the Hebrew tradition, in Torah, law is equated to right relationship. And it's that ancient idea that we're working on, right relationship.
Where I've come to with it is that it's really a worldview. Over the last 3 years, working with Scott in the center has been an opportunity to learn about it and see how it's done. In prisons, in schools, law schools, universities, in the community, in courts.
And the biggest thing that's happened in this city happened 2 weeks ago. The LAUSD School Board adopted a policy to say two things. One, we're not suspending any more kids on the basis of willful defiance. And two, we're going to put restorative justice in our schools.
That wasn't even on the radar 2 years ago.
My God, this is the first major school board in the United States to formally adopt restorative justice in schools. People who care about this were just dancing in the street.
We're not taking credit for that, but it's a piece of this bigger wave. And people who understand this and live in LA notice that what we have going here is this little program at Loyola with, one volunteer just about full-time, and one fellow, and a little tiny budget, and a lot of friends.
It's well put. A lot of friends. We've met a lot of friends.
I think in a way this goes back to Scott being a high school teacher at St. Ignatius Prep in San Francisco, and Greg Boyle, as a high school student, comes as a visiting student for some short amount of time, and they get to meet.
It must have been 1972. I was teaching English, and Greg was there visiting from Loyola High School in LA. He was just a kid, 17, and he had fallen under the influence of the Jesuits and social justice ideas, and so had I. I love being given a chance to say thank you to the Jesuits for teaching me about social justice, influencing me, and influencing Greg.
And the next time you met?
Years later, my son Tim was a senior at Loyola High School, and they have a social justice project between semesters. So Tim was going to go to Mission Dolores and live with Greg Boyle for a month. But when Tim said he wanted to do this, I said, I think this is kind of dangerous. We were living in Manhattan Beach and gangs in East LA. So I called Greg Boyle and I say, Greg, my son Tim wants to come live with you. Is it safe? I don't know what he said. But he must have laughed because it was the most dangerous time in LA. 1991 was the peak of gang violence, and the peak place was East LA. A mile around his parish, kids were shooting each other every night, and I'm like, is it safe?
Scott had a civil law practice then.
So after I left teaching, I went to Southwestern Law School in Los Angeles.
And that's kind of an irony because Scott's father went to Loyola undergrad and then Loyola Law School. And Scott went to Loyola undergrad, but parties around too much. So when he applies to Loyola Law School, they don't let him in.
I wish I could say I went right into social justice work after law school, but I was married, we had 4 kids, so I went into our corporate practice as a civil trial lawyer.
Loyola Law School doesn't let him in, and of course he becomes their star professor.
The big shift came after 22 years. I had my own a small law firm with one partner, and my partner decided to leave law practice. I had a choice as to whether to continue by myself. Saw an ad in the paper for Loyola Law School looking for a professor to teach legal research, writing, and ethical lawyering. And of course, I always loved teaching.
He was one of the first professors to win the Excellence in Teaching.
But my wife, Jean, is the real story here. At the same time, she was asked to start a preschool in our parish at American Martyrs. So she went from being a stay-at-home mom, raising 4 kids, to running this preschool and getting paid. So that enabled me to leave law practice. And that pay cut is the best investment I ever made. In 1998, I started teaching at Loyola.
I was a high school student in Culver City in '97, and there was a peace conference in San Francisco. One of my best friends went to it. The Dalai Lama was there, and my friend got exposed to social justice as a concept. And he came back totally on fire about it. So we started the Youth Coalition of Culver City. And through that, we met a group of mentors, started by a guy named Orland Bishop. He's basically a shaman from Guyana, South America, and has done a lot of work in the community, particularly in Watts, with violence prevention. And that became a significant relationship for me when I was a community studies major at UC Santa Cruz. I went to Watts to do a 6-month field study with the Violence Interruption Center, where Orland was the chairman of the board. And the executive director was Aquila Sherrills. Now, Aquila had grown up in Watts as a gang member. He was one of the first in years to make it out to go to college, where he had a personal transformation and left to go back to work with Jim Brown, a football player, and Connie Rice, and others negotiating the peace treaty in 1992. In 2002, at the end of my internship, Aquila's son, Terrell, came home from college for Christmas and went to a party, and someone didn't like the color of his sweater and shot him, and he died. Aquila had to go to friends and family members and get them to put their weapons down. He said, "That's not going to be Terrell's legacy. We've been working on peace in this city for all these years. We're not going to give that up now." At the funeral, he stood up and said, "After the young man who did this serves his debt to society, we want to see him welcomed back into this community. We want to see the healing of the wounds that caused him to commit this murder. And we recognize that this is not a 15, 16-year-old who's responsible so much as a culture of violence." I didn't know it at the time, but this was my first real witnessing.
My starting point for all this was in 2006 or so, Jeannie and I got involved in a course of study over a year called Just Faith. It was a study of the principles of Catholic social teaching.
After college, I went to Sacramento and did a meditation program. And at night, I worked in a halfway house for adults with schizophrenia.
Learning Catholic social teaching, you realize that the fundamental idea is the dignity of the human person no matter what.
I went to AmeriCorps in 2005. We were stationed in Charlotte, South Carolina when Katrina hit. So we got sent to New Orleans. We were working for FEMA, which was awful. And we had these little FEMA badges, and we learned quickly, you had to hide the badge.
From my whole Jesuit education, from Loyola High, Loyola University, and then teaching in a Jesuit high school, social justice is just the air you breathe when you're around Jesuits.
Then we did Habitat for Humanity, forest fire prevention, invasive species removal from the Everglades, helping renovate a homeless shelter in Atlanta.
To be a person for others. That's the Jesuit ideal.
So now I come back from AmeriCorps with dreadlocks down my back, and I have a lot of plans. Then I see Orland, and he says, "What do you want to do 15 years from now when you're 40? I'm struggling with this question. So the next day I go down to the beach, I cut off all my dreadlocks, and I put them in the ocean, and I say, I'm making myself available for what's next. But what's next? Help me.
In the spring of '09, I took a 40-hour training program called the Victim Offender Education Group with lifers in San Quentin. There are about 40 guys. And they had this very well-planned curriculum, including readings, a lot of journaling, writing about key moments in their lives that they would read in group. So it becomes a deep exploration of their lives about how they got to the point where they killed somebody. And then after months of meetings, they would bring in surrogate victims. When I was there, it was a young woman with 2 little kids whose husband was murdered, and a mother whose son had been shot in a drive-by. They come in and they meet the guys and tell their stories. And 1 or 2 of the guys tell their stories, so you'd have this dialogue. And it was profound. It was healing for everyone.
I thought the way to impact the big problems of the world would be to study international law, without realizing that meant law school when I said it. My dad's an entertainment lawyer, and all I ever heard from him was how intolerable law school was. So I said as a teenager, I'm never going to go to law school. If I ever try to find a law school, stop me. But he also said one of the things law school doesn't do is pigeonhole. So I get on the internet and discover that there were social justice law firms.
So at the end of that training at San Quentin, we got in a big circle, and we were kind of summing up a very emotional week of people coming in, telling their stories.
I found a place downtown, what was then Skid Row, called the Inner City Law Center, that advocates for the homeless and for inner city tenants. So I got a job as a non-lawyer advocate.
The group of about 20 of us really bonded. So now we're in a circle in the last minutes of this week together. And the question was, now what?
While I'm doing that, I applied to law school, kind of dragging my feet, and I thought something else was going to come along, so I didn't really study very hard.
So they're going around the circle.
And then I get accepted to Loyola.
And when it comes to me in the circle, now what? I say I'm going to start a Center for Restorative Justice at LSU.
What happened for me in law school was I found out I wasn't a particularly good student, but I liked being involved in all the different clubs and activities and programs. I was trying to figure out what my niche was.
Well, I get back from San Quentin, and the first thing I go to Greg Boyle, and I say I want to do a victim offender group circle at Homeboy Industries. And Greg agrees. Then I invite Victor Gold, our dean, to come to lunch with me at Homegirls Cafe. And I say, Victor, I'd really like to start a Center for Restorative Justice at Loyola. I do it pro bono, and I don't need a budget. He says, sure, why not?
So I'm going into second year and I'm trying to choose my classes, and there's this class that prepares you for the moot court competition, which is a prestigious program. So I'm signing up for it, but I look and I see they're offering for the first time this class called the Restorative Justice Seminar. And the description was like, this is a course which talks about an approach to addressing crime that prioritizes the healing of both the victims and offenders in the community as a whole. And it totally stopped. Nobody had ever said healing in law school.
I started teaching with Bob Stephan. He was a Jesuit in training.
I said, I want to take this class, but the time conflicted with the moot court competitions. So I get into moot court, and the first week, everybody's sitting there, and the professor says, okay, you guys are all going to write papers and argue with each other. We're going to whittle you down to there's more and more losers, and there's only one of you standing. Second week, I said, no. I'm going to the restorative justice class, and I did. And of course, I loved it.
I mean, can you imagine teaching guys like this?
There were less than 10 of us, people with really deep experiences, and we'd write papers every other week and share ideas with each other.
Here's the thing. Law school's pretty linear. And Seth would write these papers periodically. Seth was always a little broader than what we had assigned. Bob and I would talk about these papers. What about this guy, Weiner? It's hard to place him. That doesn't seem to be too linear. So we had to bring him down a notch.
I was always happy with the beat.
But it was great, because when we started the Center for Restorative Justice, Seth was elected student body president, so he had his hands on some money. And we had a budget. But you know, when you start programs and do talks and you buy a lunch for somebody, you need financing. We did a lot of work before your fellowship.
Yes, we had an event. Our first restorative justice panel.
The event where we had more speakers than attendees.
We had 4 people on the panel, and I think 5 people showed up in the audience.
When Seth graduated, Victor Gold, on his own initiative, created a fellowship in restorative justice. A 2-year fellowship, and gave it to Seth. I gave Victor a lot of credit because once Seth got in there, he got this amazing guy giving his full time, which for this guy's like 50 or 60 hours a week.
In May 2011, we had the first Restorative Justice Another Way conference.
Seth just got going and we developed different programs.
January 2012, the Victim Offender Group Training in partnership with Homeboy Industries and the Insight Prison Project. February 2012, the second Another Way conference with panels on the death penalty, restoring victims, and restorative justice in youth. Over 300 attended.
He's like a dynamo. It's incredible energy.
March 2012, the first meeting of Restorative Justice Collaborative of Los Angeles.
Seth started that one. At the first meeting, there was this huge circle, and it must have been 80 people, and all of them knew Seth.
April 2012, the Restorative Justice Circle Training and the panel on Latino communities and the death penalty.
He relates to people, connects to people.
May 2012, the Victim Offender Advocacy Group at the California Institute for Women, the Respect Series on Restorative Justice in School Discipline, and the Beyond Turf Wars Conference with a panel on detention alternatives.
He's endlessly curious, does
2013, the Restorative Justice in Schools project began with LMU, LAUSD, and Westchester and Rich Magnet High School. June 2013, the third Another Way conference on healing in the wake of sexual abuse.
And now, right here, the Bellarmine Forum's Restorative Justice Conference will be the largest restorative justice conference ever held. So, we've become the kind of a center in a little way for restorative justice in Los Angeles.
But restorative justice it's a global phenomenon. From 2009, when I never heard of the term, to now, it just seems like it's everywhere. And schools have been the newest incarnation of it.
That's where we're headed. If we can meet them in middle school, in high school, we can get them in a circle, get them talking and ways to resolve disputes, then we're going to prevent having a prison system with 160,000 people that are just being housed and cycling in and out of there.
It feels like the tide is turning.
The tide is turning. Last night I was downtown with a room full of DAs, and we got talking, and they think restorative justice makes a lot of sense. I mean, they're law and order. You know, it's what they do every day, trying to lock people up. But they understand that there is a more rational way to make the system matter, more human.
And now I'm going to have an opportunity in helping to create more of that.
Seth is leaving to move on to a new job.
There's a foundation that's been the primary funder for the center, and they've approached me last December and asked me if I'd start working as a consultant with them to find funding strategies to support restorative justice in North America. And I've been doing that for about 4 to 5 months. So what's going to happen is that I'm going to start working for them full-time, and I'm getting married, and we'll likely move to New York to work for the foundation.
We've succeeded in expanding the Restorative Justice Center so that now it's going to be part of the Center for Urban Resilience, which is a major center at LMU's Westchester campus. It's gone from this little seed at the law school, now it's sprouted and it's becoming interdisciplinary.
One part of this is that for 4 years, Scott has been all volunteer for this, on top of being a full-time professor. So, in the next academic year, he'll get compensated for the first time for working for restorative justice.
It'll be a closing point for the center we started at the law school, but the birthing of this this bigger project at LMU?
Restorative justice. It's a conversation that doesn't end.
So, back in the elevator.
It's not a formula. It's not something that you just have a blueprint and then you repeat it. You approach it from a point of reference and into relationship and intervene.
Martin Luther King said, power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice. And justice at its best is power correcting everything that stands against love.
So, out of the elevator and back to work. Scott Wood.
I really don't have the words to express how profoundly grateful I am and how humbled I feel to be among these heroes and to hear their stories. I want to thank first my wife Jeannie, who is here. My sister Rita and her great husband Jay. My beautiful daughter Allie is here with Kevin, her husband. My dear friend Ray came all the way down from Sacramento, a lifelong buddy and inspiration to me. And so many of you that I'd like to thank. Frankie G, I almost forgot you, Frankie. And of course, Seth Weiner, this great guy who's been such a major influence in my life and helping me to understand what restorative justice means. I want to also extend my deepest thanks to the great Sisters of St. Joseph of Orange, Sister Judith, Sister Marianne, Sister Linda, Sister Sarah. This is so beautiful, and thank you very much. I owe a special debt to religious women, as I think many of us in this room do. They were the ones that introduced me to the Baltimore Catechism when I was 6 years old. And so the religious women who not only taught me and taught many of us, but who lived social justice. So Gandhi says, be the change that you want to see. And the Sisters of St. Joseph of Orange, the other religious women have been the change, they've lived the change that we need in our world, and therefore they're a great source of inspiration to us. So I want to thank them and recognize them.